Mark Cuban says it's time to start taxing agents. And I actually agree with him, Matt.
Oh, goodness. So we're going to have a fight today. All right.
Okay, well, look, it's pretty simple. We're working hard as humans. These AI things are coming along, taking our jobs. We pay taxes. Why shouldn't they?
Okay. Well, with that framing in mind, what they're actually talking about is taxing tokens. Just a refresher for everybody. There's two types of token usage, which is input tokens and output tokens. And right now they are charged by the million token increment. And it's usually like between $1 and $20 for a million tokens, depending on the model. Now, here's my big gripe with this particular taxing scheme is that you want to essentially capture value from companies that are using agents. Now, here's the thing. You can already capture value by taxing their profits. But okay, somehow that's not a good proxy that's already in place, requires no work, has a lot of advantages from a financial standpoint. You want to tax tokens. Well, do you touch the input tokens, which is what we say to the agents, or do we tax the output tokens? I think they're talking about taxing output tokens, but then it goes further. What if the agent is using chain of thought and it's using tokens internally to generate a response, right? I might ask a very complicated question. And, I think it was Mark Twain, someone famously said, like, I would have written a shorter message if I only had more time. It's a lot, it's easy to smash out really not very good writing and a lot of it, or you can think a lot and come up with a very short answer that's very well written. So there's some ambiguity about what we're even going to tax when we tax agents and we tax their thought. But more importantly, not every token output is built evenly, right? Now, there's already taxes when you sell things. It's called a sales tax. Now, if I use Mythos and it comes back with 10 tokens and it's the line of code, the 10 tokens are the line of code in the model or in my open source thing where I need to go fix a bug, that's extremely valuable. And I might have to pay a couple $100 to get those 10 output tokens, depending, like you said, with chain of thought and things like that. On the other hand, I could ask, Haiku 3.1, what's the weather today? And they could give me an accurate answer, but output 50 tokens. How are we going to tax these things? And it's because of that reason, it's like, do you really want the US Congress, or even worse, the minor leagues of the US Congress, all the state legislatures, having to think about this? Does this really sound like something? Or how about we just continue to tax sales, profit, corporate profit, just keep it there. Like, why is AI a new thing that requires separate taxes from everything else that has already been working fine?
Well, I think realistically we are going to see a shift in the tax basis. It's realistic to think, certainly already in certain types of jobs, you're seeing less humans involved. So you're seeing less personal income tax. Now, if we did a really good job of taxing corporations, then that probably wouldn't really matter. You'd see it show up in profit somewhere in the corporations and you get a great share of it. Mark Cuban's point is there's a couple of reasons we might want to consider this. It's the tax basis. Token generation has energy consumption associated with it as well. If you've used an LLM, you'll be familiar with these verbose long responses you get that you need to read 4 paragraphs to get the answer to the question. The skeptic in me says, yeah, well, guess what? If you were a corporation generating these tokens and you began to, be taxed on those, you might be a little bit more conservative in terms of the output tokens. You would also optimize around the actual cost of generating those tokens. And then there's the question of, we don't know what's going to happen here in the next couple of years. And so it's not unreasonable to think there's going to be a bunch of displaced workers. Maybe we need to retrain them. Maybe we need a reserve in the tax basis why everything changes. So there's some merit to considering this idea of getting ahead of those challenges.
Yeah, and I think my first response, and you knew that we would have, I think, this disagreement from the text that you sent about this when you sent Mark Cuban. Certainly, I think it's a salient political issue. Again, I disagree with the form. I'm generally a fan of taxes which tax things that we don't want. For instance, if we're worried about power usage or we're worried about water usage, in the United States, we don't tax water at a market rate. A lot of people are like, why are the data centers using more water? Well, because a lot of water is essentially free in the United States, and people use it to grow alfalfa in the desert for racehorses in Saudi Arabia. Now, this is a fact, right? Like in California, that's a gigantic amount of water is used for exactly that purpose. The reason is we have issued that water from our scarce natural resources by aristocratic right. Essentially, families can pass down water rights associated with their land. Now, yeah, a lot of people love medieval times and things like that, but I don't think passing down the rights to precious natural resources that flow down from the mountains, they just pass nearby this land, but suddenly this family, who owned the land in 1870 can grow basically anything, even if that water is very valuable, right? So we grow almonds, which requires flooding gigantic fields, rain or, whether or not almonds are, there's been any rain, that almond tree needs to be grown. And so, the amount of water used on almonds, I think if someone said like a Mythos, found some critical bug and it was the equivalent of 3 almonds worth of water that it used. Because that's what we need to think. It's like golf courses, stuff like that, right? So we don't, I think what you're talking about, I'm trying to use water as an example. People hate the water usage of data centers. It's a very small fraction compared to what we spend, water on. These are very energy and resource intensive processes. And we simply have not created market mechanisms. Another one is carbon. Oh man, look at all the energy and the heat is produced by these data centers. It's like, well, we don't price out carbon, right? We know carbon is an externality of certain forms of power. If a data center is all driven off of solar, then carbon is not the externality. Land use, or maybe certain parts of the supply chain for photovoltaic cells could be damaging to the environment. But the point is, those are good ways to tax things. If you want someone to use less of something, put a tax on it. Do we want, and this is, I think, not an answer that's necessarily no, but do we want to tax tokens? Do we want people to use less AI? And that actually might be the goal of this, is a Pigouvian tax on actually people using AI whatsoever, not to make the AI pay its share or to prevent overuse of energy or water, but in fact, just make AI unprofitable for most situations. And I don't like that either. I don't think that's the right way to interact with a technology. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm being the devil's advocate here. I do think it's a conversation we need to have. But I'm like you. I think taxing the value generated and consumed, the successful business value created, makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we're not really good in the US at taxing corporate profits. So there is that challenge. There's also the counter argument to Cuban's idea, is that we're in the technology arms race to beat our geographic competitors, and taxing the input into this thing is going to slow the production of the thing, which is value from AI. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's been a topic that has garnered a lot of attention in the last couple of days. So
yeah, I am upset about the form of the tax because it's not exactly clear how it's very easy to game. It's Pigouvian against something that is not necessarily a real thing. And I don't like that. But on the other hand, how should the government interact with these potentially very large AI companies? Now, this is kind of a good segue into Anthropic. Anthropic just announced an S1, which is a document you file when you're planning to go for an IPO, initial public offering of a private company. And they, Anthropic, we had talked about this in previous episodes, just raised it like a $900 million valuation because their revenue, it's up like 5x in a few months. And they've been going 10x a year. So they're actually ahead, because 5x in 6 months times another 6 months is 25x. So they're way ahead of a 10x run rate or increase in revenue. So obviously one of the greatest revenue growth stories in history, especially around a product that is this pervasive, has a potentially much larger market size, and potentially very high, the inference gross margins could be very good when we've seen that they have they reported a 5% operating margin, which means that they probably have, they definitely have positive gross margins on their inference. And pretty lean operations too. So when you look at a company like that, that's going 25x a year right now growth, and is at $50 billion a quarter,
Making profit.
and is potentially going to, if it achieves some kind of breakthrough model and runs ahead of OpenAI and is no longer in a competitive environment, could be operating at 80% gross margins. Imagine a company doing $1 trillion a year, which is not far away from where Anthropic is, but suddenly they come up with some magical technique, which again, no one understands how any of this works, that they could operate at 80% gross margins. That's $800 billion a year. Well, that would be something like a 16, $17 trillion company if they weren't growing, right? So we have, I mean, the growth and the size of this company. And so they just raised it about $1 trillion valuation. I've heard reports that they're going to try for a $2 trillion valuation in the near future in
Yeah.
their IPO.
I mean, they have headwinds, but just ponder this for a second. I think it was Thursday or Friday they announced the raise at close to a trillion. On Monday morning, then they said, "Oh yeah, and we're going to go public too." Right? I mean, that's absolute baller move. But they do have headwinds, which are unique headwinds. One that hadn't really, you and I were talking about it, and I was trying to think about what the prime motivation was, and you were pointing out like they need huge liquidity for compute, which makes sense. You're going that quickly, you haven't solved all the inference problems and training challenges and all the rest. That makes a lot of sense. But in the sort of the macro view of the world, they're going head to head potentially with OpenAI looking to IPO and with SpaceX or whatever it's called now. And I was reading somewhere that even in the public markets, they think that one or other of these guys can consume basically, they can saturate the market or consume the market in terms of funds. So never in our history as a single business being able to go out there and potentially grab the lion's share of the available investment capacity. So super interesting. That's a headwind and that's probably the timing part of it. And I think the SpaceX S1 probably helped them as well. They could kind of get up to speed and understand how to position themselves. The other one that's kind of interesting to me, actually there's two. I don't know how big they are right now. Is it 2,000, 3,000 people, something like that? If I recall correctly, if you get in within outside of a year of going to IPO, you can get stock options basically, or you can vest on the IPO. So you're gonna have a bunch of very, very rich people. I don't know when the quiet period will end. Let's say 1st of January of next year, very, very rich people who suddenly, if you got 500 of, we should probably look it up, 500 of 2,000 people, 3,000, 4,000 people, that's a meaningful percentage of presumably not that motivated people all of a sudden in your organization.
Yeah, showing up rich is a definite problem. I've often heard of this from private equity is that, they acquire companies, but then the founder often, a private equity acquisition started the company and then sells it to private equity and then is expected to come on as an operational role. Well, it's a little tricky because if a guy, has 100 times more money this month than he did last month, maybe he's not too interested in showing up and dealing with expense reports and the minutia of running the company until you can get your operating team in there over the course of a couple of years. And so, showing up rich is like a real problem. And so generally payouts are structured in a way. And if they're operating, I mean, I'm sure they have very experienced people, but you hopefully have many layers of redundancy and you're going to make a lot of hires and plan on those people essentially being useless. Or you got to issue them way bigger option packages to keep them motivated. Yeah.
That's
So
what you have to do because, I mean, if you're using, I spend most days using Claude Cowork and code all day long. The amount of bugs in that thing, it's still very powerful, but the amount of bugs suggests to me they're not able to keep up with just the day-to-day running an application. So I don't know that they have a lot of redundancy. They also don't have the advantage that the PE guys have. If I give you a call, Matt, to acquire Pact, I'm going to give you, maybe I'll give you 20% up front and 80%
get in
earn out.
line, by the way.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
everybody, phone's
Yeah,
ringing.
yeah. But I'm going to keep you busy and motivated financially for a couple of years. When you go, other than kind of the quiet period after the IPO, you don't have a lot of control over this influx of capital into your employees. So
Well, I think both for SpaceX and Anthropic, you have a lot of true believers. Like people worked at, I have a friend who worked at SpaceX. I talked about her before. She just loved rockets. And, now she's a very wealthy person. I think she's kind of retired now. But that's the thing. Once you're vested, by the way, it's not when the stock sells. Like you can look at the price, and if it's a trillion or 2 trillion or 500 billion, who cares? You're rich. And going into work, I mean, you're one of 50,000 people at a company. Are you really going to be the one who like makes the stock price go up? Like, yeah, your marginal improvement in your own value is maybe Elon can or Dario, but like if you're just Joe Schmo, you're already well not motivated hearing these numbers and seeing a tender offer, these offers at like a trillion and stock being sold. So a problem for those companies. Valuations of real estate in San Francisco have been going insane because there's a bunch of people who know that probably already got secondary and they know they're going to have $100 million. And then so, $5 million for a house in the, Noe Valley.
Underline.
Maybe
Yeah.
they'll finally, this will be the one. No, but I mean, like, you look at valuations in the Sunset District and places that 10 years ago were kind of like well out of the way. Maybe we'll start seeing Excelsior
Yeah.
selling for 6, 7
There we go.
million and stuff like that. It's just weird neighborhoods in San Francisco because there's so much. And, in Austin, where SpaceX is nominally headquartered now, um, you know, hundreds of people that will have, dozens of or hundreds of millions of dollars each from this IPO. So it's going to really change a lot of communities, and you're going to see, I think, new VCs pop up. You're going to see, it's going to return a ton of liquidity back to the startup environment over the next couple of years. So it'll be super interesting. But yeah, kind of a nice problem to have. Oh, we did a 2 trillion IPO. You know what you can do with money? Hire other people.
There you
No
go.
one is, once you get an up and running operation, you can just say, hey, who's good at this? Who's good at this? Who's good at this? You don't need those founding employees nearly as much once you reach operational maturity, which obviously these companies have, despite the operations suffering
Yeah.
under Cloud Code.
There you go. Let's make a little bit of an announcement. We launched something new this week called breakneckpodcast.com. So we finally have a website, Matt.
It is an amazing website. Ian, you were the one who did it. And I logged in, checked it out. And what it does is it gives us the opportunity to post all of the notes and things like that. So if you listen to us on Spotify, you listen to us on YouTube, you can go there, see links, other things that come up, other posts that we do. You did it quite quickly and it looks great.
I use AI, Matt, would you believe?
Yeah,
Genuinely, it was something. I suppose it's interesting. The advantage that I have is like we kind of knew what we wanted. It wasn't particularly complex in terms of specifying what we needed. Yeah, we used all the contemporary tools, Vercel and Supabase and Claude Code and all of that stuff. So it is up there. The reason I'm happy about that is Matt and I are talking during the week. We're texting each other stuff and we're talking about stuff. And so a weekly episode is great. We get to go deep, but there's a bunch of other stuff that we're interested in. So we drop it in there. You'll also find clips and if you're interested, sometimes we reference all episodes. So it's a good place to be able to go back and grab
more
those.
importantly, the agents will be able to find it
There you go.
and learn profile us.
So one thing we posted earlier today was about Mythos. There was an update. Matt, I think we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I think there are 2 Mythos updates. Anthropic announced expansion of the Project Glasswing group of companies. And so this is, and the reason I'm so fascinated about Project Glasswing is that this is the first cutting edge model where they have not made the model public essentially immediately. Right. They've had Mythos since February, and they have not released it to the public except in very limited ways, which is Project Glasswing, which is a few select companies like Cisco, Palo Alto Networks, and so on, that would have a very big security impact if there were foreign actors, for instance, who wanted to hack our servers or networks. That has real implications. We were talking last time, I think you maybe cut one of my more gruesome examples about people who had been captured by foreign intelligence services and what happens to you if you get caught as a spy. I mean, there's real world consequences. People being defrauded, their wallets being emptied if they use crypto. So Project Glasswing has been going to companies that have the biggest exposure, and so they've added a new tranche of these types of companies that have the most to lose if there are security breaks. But it's not for every company yet. Pact has not been contacted about being part of Project Glasswing yet, and I'm waiting. Cisco and Pact. how many companies are there, right? Um, but then the other way is they revealed Mythos, I believe, through things like Ultra View, Ultra Plan, a new workflow tool. So things that have extremely high returns to high intelligence, which are generally highly complex operations. Reviewing code for bugs, it turns out, but planning and orchestration um, tend to be very intelligence sensitive, as opposed to maybe generating text is not as you don't notice nearly as much. And so in those cases, they've made the Mythos capabilities, which are it's a very big model. It's very expensive to do inference on. They've made that like 5x higher than Opus. They've made them available in small quantities in limited ways in the Claude Code experience. Um, so yeah, it's something to watch, because if this is the start of a trend, we might not have access to models anymore. We might have access to products or services which have models that are not just not public in terms of their weights, but you can't ask it general questions, because maybe it turns out that to make a really good bug finding model, you have to train it with a whole lot of cybersecurity sensitive stuff. And there's just no good way to gate it from telling anybody, how to hack somebody. And so they'll never make it public because they've trained it on data sets that they wouldn't be able to make public ever. Well, if that's the case, then eventually the smartest, most generalized models maybe just are too dangerous, and we never see them ever. And we're only kind of like getting glimpses of them through these very controlled interfaces or through these very specific programs like Project Glasswing. So that's what's at stake there, and they've expanded it, but it's still, they haven't released Mythos yet.
But they did mention, I was trying to remember where I saw it, in the Opus 4.8 release, they mentioned that they are going to release Mythos in the coming weeks to customers. That scared the heck out of me.
Well,
I was,
probably what they've done with Mythos is it's either taken longer. I think they've been constrained from inference. They just didn't have the inference to run Mythos as a retail option. They've paid something like, it was like a $50 billion contract to SpaceX for their Colossus cluster in Memphis that they built to train Grok. And now Grok didn't really hit. It was a crappy model and didn't meet, he fired everybody, and now he's acquiring Cursor. But he had all these extra GPUs that really weren't being used for inference. And so he licensed, he leased them over to Anthropic. So now Anthropic has more GPUs. They dropped 4.8, but they're probably still fairly constrained, which is one of the reasons they have positive operating margins on Claude compared to ChatGPT, which has been able to acquire much more inference earlier, but as a result is maybe not as careful about making money and is releasing more data-intensive models or inference-intensive models themselves. So it's an interesting spot, but I think probably the biggest consideration is just that it's a very big model and very expensive to do inference on. It's sitting there, but if they were to make it available to everybody, they would instantly run out of compute. And so this is a way that they can maintain their margins, continue to be kind of profitable, and then keep everyone feeling that they're ahead of the game instead of just having a shittier model. Because 4.8 for a lot of benchmarks is not nearly as good as 5.5, whereas Mythos is better. But again, they don't have to release it because they have this whole story like, oh, it's too strong, it's too dangerous. But
okay. Here's my last one for the week. I got an email this morning, actually, from A16Z. I'll post a link to it. They do a pretty good newsletter. I think it's every day. They do a good, actually every Friday. They go to like the industry and charts, which is a good one. But this one is entitled "The Next Frontier of Visual AI is Code." It put language to something that I sort of observed but hadn't really thought about deeply. So if you've generated an image with AI, it's cool, and you're like, good looking guy wearing a green shirt with an Irish accent. Maybe the Irish accent is going to show up in the image, but you know what I mean. You give
can
it
see it in someone's face if they're
yeah.
Irish.
Yeah, you definitely can. But and you get this image and you're like, okay, it's cool, but can you tweak this or tweak that? And we did it with some video last week. It's not very editable. In fact, sort of if you imagine having a toolbox to be precise, to be a surgeon and change that image in the way you want it, language isn't necessarily exactly the right way to go about it. And their point is, we're shifting into a world of kind of programmatic image generation. If you're a graphic designer, you have layers and masks, and you have all these tools and gradients and all this different type of stuff. We're beginning to see that actually happen and be applicable. So I'll give you just a quick example. If you go to ixfoundry.co, so that's my company. If you go there, you'll see an animation, an SVG animation. It's got all these layers and sequences and everything else. But the point is, it didn't just through diffusion generate an image. It actually wrote code to create that animation. And that's kind of the hurdle we need to jump over, I think, to get to my panacea, which is this world of, hey, I'm not really good with words. I consume information much better visually. I think that's the primary roadblock. So it's interesting, just they kind of crystallize that realization for me.
Yeah, it just makes me think of grad school. So the grad student ahead of me, this guy Matt, much better physicist than me, insane genius. I was very lucky to work with him. So he taught me everything I know about electronics and computers and everything. He just educated me. And when it came time to write his PhD thesis, you write scientific literature in something called LaTeX, LaTeX, but it's a chi, so you say LaTeX. And you can write all the words and format the formulas and things like that. And then you kind of like what I did when I wrote my PhD thesis is I just made the little images when I was making diagrams and stuff. I'd make them in another program. Like, I don't know, you can go look at my PhD thesis online if anybody wants to. And like, sometimes it's like paint. You're like, this is effectively what a percolation diagram looks like for this thing. And then save it as a PNG and then you put it in there. But that's not what Matt did. This other Matt. He made all of his diagrams, which were complex and very good, in LaTeX, exactly the way that you're talking about. Saying, okay, there is a line and it has this angle. It starts here, it ends here. It has this width, and then here's this circle, and here's a gradient. And the thing is, this whole thing, there was no pictures in it. It was just code, and when it was rendered, it showed up as images. And that's essentially what we're talking about, is that it would just be a set of text that's output that corresponds to images, but we need models that are trained on that correspondence, which it felt like they really haven't been there. And to your point about the value of that, when I go create decks and presentations in Notebook LM, a lot of times they're almost there. And it would be so simple for me if I could just adjust the gradient or move a document or edit the words. And they're adding these features, but it's all diffusion based. And so it looks really bad. And no one's been happy with the diffusion based editing, where it basically just re-renders a small patch with different words or different image. But if instead of it was all generative, is what we used to use those words for, so that it was all parameterized.
And I'm not sure how they've managed to do it, but you're beginning to see that in the text now, where you'll get an image and you'll say, we use it for our thumbnails, right? And I'll be like, no, move the text, or no, change that text. And it works really, really well now. So I don't understand how they're doing that exactly, but they've overcome that hurdle.
But anyway, so there's huge advantages and then you could have open source. Then you get all the advantages of code with images. If we can move that paradigm where all images are maybe very large code bases, because like, imagine you want to render an image like the one here, right? Like just of actual people. Well, that would be absurd. But with AI, that's all we are, is kind of like eigenmodes of certain spaces and stuff like that. You could create very good parameterizations, which maybe exist in a very weird latent space, where I could like make myself uglier, prettier, taller, shorter, right? Like just with a knob, and you could just type it in, and imagine the control we could have over our presentations, but moreover, how much better we would be at interacting with AI to produce these multimodal presentations and ways of communicating. Because it always gets about 90% of the way there, and you're like, oh, this is great. And then fixing the last little bugs, because you go back and you revert to these old workflows, takes far longer than everything else.
Sometimes you never get there. You're like, oh, it's so good. Could you just change this? And suddenly it changes 3 other things at the same time. And you're like, ah.
Yeah, and I feel like for coding, it used to feel that way too. And it was just in November that it kind of got over the hump. And then you've seen the impact on industry and the impact on Claude's revenues from getting over that hump where it went from it got close, but it was too much effort to get the last mile to they somehow cracked it and it produced this. I think it got close enough. It got over that threshold and it made it so that it went from, man, this is extraordinarily interesting, but it's not really worth my time because I have to do so much work to fix it, to, yeah, I have to do a lot of work to fix it, but way less than it would take to do it the old fashioned way. So everybody basically instantly switched their workflows over, that was in the know around coding in the last few months. And I think the same thing was going to happen if we start to see more effective parameterizations. And you can imagine the same thing for text, like make this 20% less corny. Stop using those damn hyphens. There's so many like low-hanging opportunities for AI.
Yeah. Anything else that caught your attention this week?
I think those IPOs, man, it's going to be very wild. And a lot of people are going to be rich, and we're going to have a different political structure because, there's going to be different people investing in races, different people running for office. A lot of people are going to be, everyone complains that Congress is not good at math. Wait 10 years. People that are very good at linear algebra in the halls of power, hopefully. So I say that as a math guy. I don't know if it's going to be good for anybody else, but we'll at least have much better optimization strategies and perhaps better tax law as well.
Perhaps. No
So
token taxing, though,
no
according to us.
token taxing for me.
All right. All right, Matt. Well, we'll leave it there. Folks, check breakneckpodcast.com for all the latest, and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.